Hey everyone, Codith here. This is my Earthquake Barbarian build for Diablo 4 Season 7. So before we get into it, I'm just going to show you a little bit of what the damage looks like and what to expect. So the majority of our damage is coming from our Earthquakes, as you can see. This build is really good for mouse and keyboard and controller. I've played both. But what I've been doing is, majority of the damage is from the Earthquakes, and to finish them off, we'll use Hoda to explode the Earthquakes. So, see, we're hitting for, what was it, like a few 100 billion damage there? And we still don't have, like, all of our tempers. We'll go over the gear later. I'll show you, like, what I have currently. But, not bad for the amount of gear that we have right now. But anyway, let's go over it. Let's get into the skills and the nitty-gritty of the build. So, first off, we are taking Rallying Cry. Rallying Cry grants us movement speed, resource generation, not that we need it for this build. Grants us Unstoppable, and also grants us Fortify, which helps us do a little bit more damage because we're taking counteroffensive on our passive tree. Next up, we have Warcry. This is another damage boost here. We also get like an increased damage boost as long as there's at least 6 enemies nearby when we cast this. Thirdly, we have Wrath of the Berserker. This is our ultimate skill. Now, when we have 5 ranks in it, it pulls in surrounding enemies, which is very nice for corralling a bunch of monsters and getting them into your Earthquakes. Also deals damage, grants us berserking, and we deal like increased multiplicative damage, 25x up to 100x with our berserking damage. And we also get movement speed and increased fury generation from this as well. Next up, we have Ground Stomp. This is one of the things that's spawning our Earthquakes, not the main thing though, but this also deals damage and stuns enemies and lowers the cooldown of our ultimate, so our Wrath of the Berserker here. Next up, we have Lunging Strike. This is our basic attack. This is what's causing all those Earthquakes to spawn. We'll kind of go over that a little bit more later in detail when we go over the gear, but we're pairing this with the Moni rune because these are tagged as mobility skills right here. And another highlight here, that last bullet point, critical strikes with Lunging Strike grant you berserking for 3 seconds. So we're pretty much permanently berserking with this. And then lastly, we have Hammer of the Ancients. This is more of like a finisher move right now for me. But what this does is explodes our Earthquakes, as you saw earlier. We'll stack a bunch of Earthquakes on top of each other and just like use it as a finisher pretty much. And if we overpower with it, we'll deal 40x increased damage, or multiplicative increased damage for 5 seconds, which is very nice. Now let's go over our skill tree. We maximize this, come up top here. So first off, we got 1 point into Lunging Strike, Enhanced, and Combat. That's where we're getting our berserking. No additional points in this because that's not where our damage is coming from. Next up, we're going down here, 1 point into Hammer of the Ancients, Enhanced, and Violent. That's where we get that increased damage if we overpower. Warpath as well, we have 2 points in. This also grants us increased damage if we overpower. And coming down to the next tree, we max out Ground Stomp to get that cooldown reduction down. Enhanced and Strategic Ground Stomp. This is how we're lowering the cooldown of our ultimate ability. 3 points into Imposing Presence for that increased maximum life. And Martial Vigor for that damage reduction against elites. 1 point into Rallying Cry, Enhanced, that's where the Unstoppable is coming from, and Strategic, that's where the Fortify is coming from. And then lastly on this branch, we have Belligerence. So when we ever damage an enemy with a basic skill, that also increases our damage, so we're constantly having this buff on us. Coming down here, we're maxing out Warcry, Enhanced Warcry, there's our Berserking, and then Power Warcry, there's a added extra damage boost right there. 1 point into Booming Voice to increase the shout skill effect duration, so Warcry and Rallying Cry, those durations. 3 points into Aggressive Resistance, just so we have extra damage reduction while berserking. 3 points into Pit Fighter, this grants us increased damage to close enemies as well as damage reduction. 3 points into No Mercy for increased critical strike. 3 points into Slaying Strike for increased damage to injured and healthy enemies. And we got 1 point into Thick Skin, just so we can grab 3 points into Counteroffensive. As I mentioned earlier, this is the added damage that we get when we have Fortify. And coming down to this branch, we've got 3 points into Duelist. This increases our attack speed, so this helps us proc more Earthquakes with our Lunging Strike. Heavy Hitter, this kind of self-explanatory, increased damage with our Earthquakes and Ultimates. 5 points into Wrath of the Berserker, so we can get that new added effect of pulling in the monsters. 1 point into Prime for the increased movement speed, and then 1 point into Supreme to get that damage bonus. We got 3 points into Heavy-Handed, increased critical strike damage when we use two-handed weapons. Wallop as well, so when we use bludgeoning weapons, we deal increased damage as well if the enemies are stunned or vulnerable. And then lastly, we're taking Unconstrained, so Berserking's damage bonus is increased to 60% X, while below 65% life, you're always Berserk and you gain damage reduction, physical damage reduction. So that's really nice key passive here to add to our damage. Next up, let's go over our Paragon. So I'm just going to go over this briefly, just to keep this video short, but if you want to check out the link in the description, the build planner is there in Mobalytics. But anyway, starting off with our first board, we have Rumble. You want to grab as much strength as you can here. There's a lot of strength here to grab. We get a lot of earthquake damage out of that. Coming up top here, our next board, we took Blood Rage, and we have Territorial. This gives us vulnerable damage, also gives us damage to close and damage reduction to close. We went over to the right next, our third board. This is Decimator, and we took the Ire Glyph. So increased damage while berserking and reduced damage from elites while berserking. And we got that increased damage to close as well. Next up, I went up this way, and this is the Force of Nature board, and I took Wrath. So this gives us critical strike damage as well as multiplicative critical strike damage. And then Force of Nature, this is really important here. You want to make sure your damage to close is high enough to cap this bonus at 200%, as you can see down there. Next up, the last board I took. This was the Weapons Master board, so increased damage to enemies that are injured and healthy. And I took the Challenger Glyph. Yeah, it grants you bonus to all normal nodes, damage to elites as well. So I'm only on 253 Paragon points right now. I have this build set to 250. I will work on a 300 one in the future too to strive for, but we're going to start like filling up a bunch of this stuff and taking more of these other nodes too. But for right now, we're just doing like the 250 board. Next up, let's go over our Mercenaries. So I've hired Rahir here. This is our main dude. We've got Ground Slam, Aegis for that all res, Bastion, and then we've got Inspiration. So we deal increased damage as well when he ground slams. Yeah. And next up, we have, for our reinforcement, we have Aldkin. For him, we have Fields of Languish. This just procs off our Hammer of Ancients. So what this does is it slows enemies and it also lowers their damage by 20%. So just think of it as like a damage reduction, extra damage reduction. For our expertise, we are taking the two-handed mace technique. You deal 15x increased critical strike damage while berserking. Since we're permanently berserking pretty much, we're going to be stacking critical strike damage and crit chance with this build. For our seasonal witchcraft powers, we've got Piranado. This is helpful because it pulls in surrounding monsters. We don't have to like chase them down. So we can have them all in a group, do a bunch of earthquakes on top, and then light them up. Next up, we have Shaken Soul. Since we're not taking Exploit on our Paragon board, this is our source of vulnerable. Hex of Whispers. This grants us Fortify, also deals some shadow damage as well. Aura Specialization. We get increased size for our auras, and then we deal increased critical strike damage to enemies within our auras. Soul Harvest. This increases our primary core stat. This is very important for one of our aspects for our earthquakes. And then in general, we get a lot of our damage from our core stat, which is strength. Aura of Siphoning is the last one. This just deals poison damage and it also heals us for 1% of our maximum life. Now let's go over our gear. So as you can see, I've got 0 mythics in this build at the moment. I also don't have optimal affixes, don't have optimal masterworks or tempers, but with what we have right now, I feel like we've been doing pretty good and we've got decently far in the pit. But if you guys want to see the items that I'm striving for, like what to masterwork, what tempers, what stats, that's all in the build planner. There's a link in the description. But let's go over what we have and kind of go over the key highlights in the synergies. So I've got the Ugly Bastard helmet here. Wrath of the Berserker cooldown reduction, super important. That's our ultimate here. As well as aggressive resistance. That gives us damage reduction while we're berserking. Right here. Next up, oh, other thing. You deal that last line right here. You deal increased fire damage. That's multiplicative, 100x up to 100x multiplicative fire damage. We'll go into that later. Next up, this is the chest piece that we're using. This is the new item that launched with this season. The main important thing here is the chance for Earthquake to deal double damage. Super important. But yeah, the defensive stance is nice. The armor, Hammer of the Ancients ranks. This is what's exploding those Earthquakes, though. There is some bugs with those currently, but I'm hoping those get patched this season so we can fully see the true power of this build. But that's currently why I'm only using the Hoda to explode the Earthquakes as a finisher, because your DPS will fall off. But yeah. Next up, we have gloves here. I've got Inner Calm on the gloves, so when we stand still, we get increased damage. We've got Might on our pants for damage reduction while we cast a basic skill, which is our Lunging Strike. I'm currently using Yen's Blessing because Rakanoth's Wake is so hard to find, but ideally with this build, I would like to get Rakanoth's Wake with greater affix on all res and cooldown reduction. That would be ideal for me. Next up, we've got our Incendiary Fissures. This is on our two-hander here. So this is right here. Your Earthquakes deal, this is the aspect, your Earthquakes deal increased damage and their damage is converted into fire. So that ties in with our Ugly Bastard Helmet, increasing our fire damage as well. So we're really leaning into fire damage and Earthquakes on this. Heavy Hitter is important as well, because that's on our Paragon, not Paragon, our skill tree here. Heavy Hitter right there, that just increases our Earthquake damage. That one's super important. For our runes, we've got Moni and Tech. So Moni, cast 2 mobility skills to invoke the Earthquake. 1, 2. That's all you gotta do. For our one-hander, we've got Executioners. Your overpowers will spawn an Earthquake every 4 seconds. Your Earthquake damage is increased by 15x for every 100 strength you have. So that's why ramping up strength is super important on this build. Next up, we have Edge Masters. So skills deal increased damage based on how much primary resource you have. We're pretty much always full on primary resource, so we're always getting the full benefit out of this. Again, we've got Heavy Hitter on these. So for damage while berserking versus Wrath of the Berserker on these tempers, once you get the cooldown low enough on Wrath of the Berserker, I think you can switch from berserking damage to Wrath of the Berserker damage while that's active. But I'm in like the middle zone right now, trying to find the balance. I'm hoping to switch over to damage while Wrath of the Berserker is active, but I haven't got this cooldown low enough yet. Hopefully when we get Rakanoths. Next up, we've got our Earthquakes. This is a pole arm. Oh yeah, these are swords, by the way, for the crit damage. Pole arm here, this gives us extra vulnerable damage. You'd also want to get crit damage on these as well. Strength, life, and crit damage on all your weapons. Let's see. Chance for Earthquakes to cast twice. That one's going to be super important. You want that at least one of these weapons here. And you want to masterwork that as well. Because you want a chance for those Earthquakes to cast twice. It's just too good. You want to stack those. The Earthquake aspect. Ground Stomp creates an Earthquake. That's how we're getting the Earthquakes from Ground Stomp. And you deal increased damage as well. And we also have that last line. Earthquakes deal increased damage. Yeah, so lots of damage buffs here. For the runes, we've got Igni and Gar. So Igni, you store Offering every 0.3 seconds. Cast a non-basic skill to gain the stored Offering. So when we do that, that's it right here. It's full. We can cast our Shout. We can cast this. We can cast this. Yeah, we can cast any skill that's not a basic skill. And you'll get that increased critical strike damage. Or critical strike chance. For our amulet, we've got Bull Kathos here. So even though we're not using Leap, this is really nice because it increases our Earthquake damage. Strength, at least we have Strength on this. That's super important. But you want to get those passives. You can get them like Pit Fighter or Heavy Handed. For our first ring, we've got Elements. So we deal increased damage. It cycles between fire, lightning, and physical, or cold, poison, and shadow. That fire and physical is where it's at, though. And then lastly, we've got Vehement Brawlers. So casting an ultimate skill increases your damage by up to 30x for 8 seconds. And you also gain 2 additional ultimate skill ranks. So yeah, we've got a lot of multiplicative stuff with this build. For our gems, you want to take rubies for strength for your main stat. You want to make sure on your two-handed weapons, put your runes on your two-handed weapons, because strength is more important than this crit damage here that you get from emeralds. So that's why we take our runes in our weapons instead. And for the seasonal gems, I have not gotten those yet, but if you want to see what I'm suggesting to take, that's all in the build planner. Alright, let's go to the training dummies one last time before I show you some pit gameplay. So, we're going to see if we can hit some big numbers here. One thing that's very important with this rotation, you want to make sure you cast your Wrath of the Berserker before you cast your Ground Stomp. The reason why is because your Ground Stomp lowers the cooldown of your Wrath of the Berserker. You don't want to like do it the opposite and then like miss out on that cooldown reduction. So here I'll show you an example right here. Wrath of the Berserker, 20-second cooldown. Ground Stomp, boom, down to 5. Yeah, super nice, super nice. But let's see if we can get some big damage numbers here. I'm going to wait for my Ground Stomp cooldown to finish up. Then I'm going to go with all my buffs here. There we go. Ground Stomp, then let's explode it. 199 billion, I saw that on the right there. Let's try it one more time here. I guess this time without those first 2 shouts. Let's see what we hit. 74, I think that was. Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. 132. But yeah, I'm thinking when this build really comes online, I'll have fully masterworked, I'll have greater affixes, especially on attack speed. When we cap out on attack speed, or get close to it, we're going to have that much more earthquakes here because of our lunging strikes casting them, pretty much. So with all those extra earthquakes, that just means more explosions as well, more damage ticks overall. Yeah, this build's going to be really good, I feel. Well, yeah, here is some pit gameplay. Enjoy. And there you have it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I had a fun time making it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave some comments down below if you have any questions. Reach out on Discord or Twitch where I stream live. And yeah, take it easy, everyone. Take care. Peace.